All right, so let's get started. And obviously, we come together right now. It's sort of a time of sadness and tragedy, with lives lost or shattered due to war in Ukraine, to earthquake, gun violence, and our divisions being stoked by self-serving leaders. But we gather seeking wholeness in our community of learners who join in the study of Torah, and may we find the comfort that we are seeking in this gathering.
Good prayer.
Yes, amen, amen. So I am going to look to share the bracha, which probably everybody knows by heart, but all together, Baruch atah
Adonai Eloheinu
melech
haolam
asher
shanu
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so for an opening question, I would like to ask, is there a spiritual practice? Hi, Nancy. Just on time. Is there a spiritual practice that you engaged in at first by tradition, but in time has developed a deeper meaning for you?
Yes.
Ashley? Okay. Tell us about
I'm just looking for a yes or no answer. The answer is yes.
it.
No, actually, it's funny that you even say that or ask that, because in the last 10 years, something that was absolutely routine and didn't even register and not even noticed and was practically irrelevant and taken for granted, I started to actually be affected by physically, and that is the opening of the ark. There's always, the thing you give to the person that doesn't know, right? It's when you're giving out the aliyot. But I had people talk about a revelation. So opened the ark, and it was like I was hit by this power, which, I mean, I'm not a particularly theistic or even spiritual person by nature, but it moved me. The sense of power and energy coming out when you open those plywood, things. So there you go.
Actually, I love that notion, and in particular, the way in which revelation just kind of hits you and in a very unexpected way. And now, do you feel it every time that ark is opened, or no?
Sometimes.
Right? Sometimes.
But it's something that not once ever, even in a small way, even registered. It was just a kind of opening the door. So
yes. Thank you for sharing that very evocative moment. Does anyone else? Susanna.
Well, I guess I have one, and it was always meaningful at one level, but it's evolved so much over the decades, I think, as I've aged, maybe. But when I was really young, my father, when he was like putting on his tie before he got his little briefcase and hat and went off to work, we would all gather in his bedroom. There were 4 of us kids, and we would sing the Modeh Ani, the early morning prayer, which is thanking God for giving us, really, I guess, in a way, the breath or the life or the soul. And it's a prayer of gratitude, but for me, it was just a song, and a time to be with Dad, and over the years, I used to do that with my kids, but it didn't really register the deep meaning of waking up every morning and being grateful as it has in the last few years. I think, and particularly since the pandemic, where just every single morning I would wake up and say Modeh Ani, and so I would say it's a spiritual practice that wasn't necessarily spiritual at all, particularly in the beginning. It became a very rote thing. I would just wake up and automatically utter those words, and it became imbued with a much, much deeper meaning, all the obvious reasons over the years.
Wonderful, thank you. And it's amazing how that kind of thing spans generations and time. Yes, Annette.
Listening to music. I've always loved listening to music, but As I've gotten older, it's become a transporting experience.
And is there a particular kind of music that will do that for you, or composer?
I think, well, I love all kinds of music, but probably the music that's most transporting is classical music.
Mhm.
And anything that's before the last century.
Mhm.
I'm not so good at modern classical music. I still
Right.
haven't gotten the hang of it.
Yeah, none of this tonal stuff for you, huh?
Yeah, well, it's an intellectual experience, but it's not an emotional experience for me.
Right, right. Well, thank you for that. And I'll just ask you one last question. How do you describe the place it transports you to?
I don't know. It's spiritual. It's, you know, I'm very ambivalent about whether or not there's a whether or not there's a God, but when I listen to music, it's hard not to believe that there's some higher power.
Mm,
When I walk in nature, it's hard not to believe that there's some higher power, but I don't walk in nature. Walking in nature does it too, but I don't walk in nature as often as I should, as I would like to. Let me speak.
yeah. Yes. All right. Thank you for removing that normative,
I think,
Should. Okay. Very good. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to add?
when my parents died, I went to Minyan every day. And at first it was a ritual, but over time it took on new layers of meaning that were, about community that were very meaningful.
I'm sure gave you a real appreciation for the ritual of gathering in community and needing 10 for the minyan, and
Yeah.
to give comfort to the mourners.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That wasn't all that very long ago.
No.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get started? So we are in Parshat Mishpatim.
Do you have one, Rich, or you're going to share it later?
Share what? Oh, do I have one?
Yeah.
Two. So the one that I have is the Shabbat Kiddush has, which my dad used to recite in a little bit more of the kind of Sephardic, in particular, Baghdadian melody. And Baghdadian melody is a little bit like Annette describing 20th century classical music. It's not quite as melodic as what you're used to with the kind of major scale Ashkenazic music. And it's pretty monotonal sometimes. Anyway, so I went through that, as a young child, and as I have been doing this as an adult, the significance of renewal and kind of almost participation in the act of creation and linking up the creation of the world to the creation of Israelite people, it's all sort of packed in there. So that's and as the vehicle for transmitting tradition to the next generation. I mean, it's all packed in there in a way that it never was to begin with. So let me do a brief overview of Parshat Mishpatim, and I'm sure as you read it, you could feel that we were coming into a new phase of the Torah, the end of this narrative that's preoccupied us since Genesis through the Exodus from Egypt. And we've hit the point where, they don't make Disney films on this Parsha. Frankly, for the rest of the Torah, we're going to get into, a lot more law and a lot less narrative and history, or at least not quite the history that you make movies out of. Maybe there's a short on Balaam's talking donkey. And then instead, we're treated to an extensive compendium of laws, treating a range of subjects: slaves and their rights, murder, hitting or insulting one's parents, assault and injury, damage caused by oxen, damage caused to oxen, negligence, thievery, et cetera, et cetera. Dietary laws, the meaning of justice, the return of lost animals, bribery, the seventh Shemitah year, the major holidays, the dedication of the choice first fruits to God, and you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk, which actually is mentioned 3 times in the Torah. And then the Parsha ends with this ceremony involving Moshe, Aharon, and his sons, Nadav and Abihu, and 70 elders going up the mountain. Moshe is allowed to approach God. Moshe hears the commands, repeats them to the people who say that all the things that God has commanded we will do. And then he writes down the laws. There's this elaborate sacrifice ceremony. And then Moses reads this thing called the Book of the Covenant, question what that is. And the people say in response, Na'aseh v'nishma, probably 2 of the most famous words in the Torah. We will do and we will hear. And then the entourage ascends and actually sees God on a throne of sapphire. They eat and drink in God's presence and are not harmed. And then God invites Moshe up the mountain to get the tablets. And Moses dramatically walks into a cloud and disappears. So there's so much in this parsha to discuss. We certainly will not be able to get to all of it. I would just want to briefly talk about where we are in liturgical time. Since we do these monthly, I haven't really had an opportunity to talk about the first 8 chapters of Exodus have this mnemonic called the Shovavim Tat, which is the first letters of the chapters, the first 8 chapters, Shemot, Va'era, Bo, Beshalach, Yitro, Shoftim, Terumah, and Tetzaveh. In addition to being a mnemonic, Shovavim is mischievous ones. And it's an allusion to children and the fact that these portions are read during the winter, which is a time that traditionally had a sort of illness and hardship when, disease would run rampant. And there was certainly a lot of anxiety about children. And interestingly, someone told me that there is a Dennis the Menace character in Hebrew comics called Dani Shovavani. So Shovavim, it's the mischievous ones. We're about to enter the month of Adar. Rosh Chodesh of Adar is going to be on Wednesday and Thursday. And the holiday of Purim is going to begin in early March, on March 6th. There's going to be a Megillah reading at the temple. Please show up if you can. And that means that Pesach is going to be here in about 6 weeks. Placing the Parsha in the narrative, so the previous Parsha, Yitro, we have the revelation on Mount Sinai, the giving of the 10 Commandments. And in addition to the Exodus, the other big subject of the book Exodus is the building of the Mishkan, which takes up most of around the last third of the book. So proceeding from the giving of the Torah to the building of the Mishkan would have been kind of a natural segue, right? God reveals God's self to the people, and then the construction of God's dwelling place would be the next step. But intervening that is this whole compendium of laws. And so the question is, what does that mean and why? And why don't we start? Very often we go to the first sentence to see what kind of introduction and segue it's giving us. So let's go to Exodus 21:1. These are the rules that you shall set before them. And in Hebrew, ve'eleh hamishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. So just stopping there, I'm interested in people's reactions, responses. Does anything within the verse, strike you of note?
Well, I'll tell you what struck me first was it really depends on where you put the emphasis. Because, these are the rules. And somebody's reaction might be, there are rules. And then, but the other thing is, for Moses, is that you shall set before them, not me. I'm not doing it. You're doing it. So that's what struck me.
Well, actually, those are really, I really appreciate you raising both of those. Just starting with the second one, Moses as the conduit, and this is not a direct, utterance from God to the people. and very often Moses is the conduit for this. But Moses isn't mentioned either. Like nobody's mentioned. Moses is implied, and that's right. And then rules, I guess is maybe the star of the sentence. And the word. So what we'll do. You're right to focus on the word rules. Other reactions? Yes, Annette.
Well, apropos of your question in the assignment, I don't think you can build a Mishkan until you have social order.
Mm.
And so I think all of these rules are a way to create social order. I don't think God wants to come and live among the people until there's some kind of social order.
Well, that's wonderful. That observation gives us the reason, right, for the placement of all of these rules right after the revelation and for the Mishkan. So thank you for sharing that. It's a astute observation.
Just a note, this is Joanne Robert Alter, translated as laws, not rules. And that implies a different, because I'm kind of system, as Annette said, I think.
Well, Joanne, I really appreciate you turning to another translation, because I think that turns us to the word mishpatim. And there are lots of words in the Hebrew language that could have been used for this, like mitzvot, right? Commandments, chukim. So the specific selection of mishpatim, does that carry any connotations that people want to mention? Yes, Merle.
It comes from shofet, which is judge. So these are the judgments. It's not chukim.
I think traditionally chukim are laws without a rationale, an apparent rationale. So you're right, that's a separate category. But to go back to your point, mishpat, shofet, judgments, and the other Hebrew word that has a common root, mishpat, means justice. And so I think the whole concept of justice and the just society is wrapped up with that very specific word choice. So very good to focus us on the connotations of that. Any other thoughts? Yes, Susanna.
I guess, given that literally just before this, we heard the 10 dibrot, right? That comes from the word diber, daber, whatever was spoken directly by God, supposedly, and there are those 10. What is the relationship? It sort of begs the question, what is a mishpat in contrast to these 10 words or statements or utterances or whatever we want to call it? And is there something that's more that people need to organize around these very top 10 principles and then make them into something practical that would be more in the form of, as we've just been discussing, laws to live by, ways to actually carry out in a pragmatic way these principles, these higher principles, let's say. That's just a thought.
Yes, it's wonderful, right? It's asking the question, do we have almost like a relationship of the Constitution as the kind of network of principles, and then now we have the specific laws that put that into action. I guess another contrast is, although not exclusively, certainly the 10 Commandments come out of the box with worshiping God, acknowledging God's primacy, and some of the 10 Commandments are about the relationship between people. But when you move to Mishpatim, it becomes predominantly about the relationships between people. And I think going back to Annette's point, sort of building the just society before you can move on to the Mishkan. So thank you for making that tie between this portion and what came before. What in this sentence is begging us to look back? One little piece of this sentence that nudges us to look backwards.
The
What?
va?
The vav and is a conjunctive. And just as
so.
yeah, and these. And Rashi comes in to say that when the vav appears, the vav is saying it's connected to what came before. Shmot begins, right? The book of Exodus begins, Ve'ela Shmot. And Rashi came in there to say, oh, this same sentence appears back at the end of Genesis. Why is it being repeated? And, he sort of goes on the drash. So Ve'ela does the same thing here. Yes, Ashley.
I have a question that has to do with the chronology of all of this. In Yitro, if I remember, and I read Torah even in between Torah study sessions.
On those long train rides, Ashley?
No, actually, I have an evangelist friend of mine in California who's the head of his church, and we meet once a month to look at a Torah portion, which he calls Bible study. Anyway,
Yeah.
But Yitro, I remember a part of it, which is that Moses' father-in-law tells him, hey, Moses, you can't decide all these disputes. You can't adjudicate all this stuff by yourself. You got to get elders, leaders to help you, right?
Yeah.
Is that in Yitro?
Yep, it is.
So what I was wondering is, that happens before all these rules and laws and ways of deciding things came down to him. What was he using before? And is it possible that there's a chronological, I wouldn't say error, but that there's an anomaly in the way the text is written?
So it's a very astute observation. And that's a whole nother Torah study, which
All right.
we'll do another time. But I don't want to just kind of leave you hanging on that completely. There are some chronological anomalies that the rabbis debate over. And I'll just say that the biggest one is that you've got the revelation of the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, kind of at the end of Yitro, the previous chapter. And then you've got Moses walking into the cloud to get the tablets at the end of Mishpatim. And those
Right.
two really feel linked together. And how is it? Are they, in fact, not in chronological order? And if so, why did the compilers of the Torah choose to split them up? Or in fact, are they separate? And I think the other thing that I would say is the whole issue of if Moses was judging and expounding the statutes, what statutes was he expounding? Because they hadn't been given yet. Those are really, really astute. We will talk about that second one. So, you've hit the mother lode with those questions, Ashley. Thank you for asking them. So there's one other aspect of this sentence that no one has commented upon. And I'm just going to point to the end, Asher tasim lifneihem, that you will put before them. Now, normally you'd say something like, Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, right? God spoke to Moses to say, meaning this is what you're going to now, or as follows. And it's a speaking. This is put it before them. So what does that mean to people when you hear put it before them? Yes, Janet.
It implies to me that these are the words of God. That these are the words of God to Moshe.
Yes, well, definitely, I agree with that. But who's the lifneihem in that? Before them, who's the them?
The people.
The people of Israel. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's definitely God's words that are being put before. Go ahead, Merle.
It almost sounds like they're written.
It
It had something, concrete to give them, not just something oral.
does imply something concrete. That's true. Although it doesn't necessarily do that, you're right. It does kind of not, move you towards that, and that for it to be put before the people in a way that, they could, I guess, come back to, right? They would need
Something concrete. You
Yeah.
can't, things that you hear don't stay there forever.
words are written on the wind when spoken, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. Go ahead, Susanna, then Nancy.
Well, you could interpret it as they were laid out. They weren't set down from on high, and that they're before the people to kind of review, discuss, maybe buy into, accept. It's an offer almost, as opposed to a laying down the law.
Mm,
So that's very interesting. Like, put it before you. It seems more like an offering.
right.
Like,
Proposal.
here's some ideas, guys.
Yeah.
What do you think? You
Right,
know?
right. It's definitely an invitation to come and, and Rashi talks about the notion of these things being laid out on the table for actually kind of a comprehensive presentation. But yes, for inspection. And going back to Merle's question is like, and how are they to be inspected? It does sort of imply maybe there's some tangibility. Nancy.
I was going to say this exact same thing, that they're being presented as an offering,
Yeah.
maybe even a present.
Yes. And then also in a way, in a comprehensive offering. I have this vision of, these trinkets at the shuk, and you come in and you get to kind of look at them all and figure out, but you take the package, right, is sort of the way that's said. So there are a lot of kind of hints and directions that first sentence sends us to. I want to go this notion of Susanna talking about principles of like constitutional versus, and Ashley talking about, and what exactly was Moses expounding. So two things on that. There's a really interesting midrash in the Talmud that says Abraham, our forefather, fulfilled the entire Torah before it was given, as it is stated, because that Abraham listened to my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, my laws. So that's a quote from Genesis. And that indicates that Abraham observed all of the mitzvot of his own accord and was rewarded in his old age as a result. That's sort of the extreme version of not a lot of Torah being given, but being able to follow it and expound it. Now, I think none of us lives up to that ideal, but I do think that even with all the Torah that we've been given and all the commandments and Mishpatim, to be able to figure out the right path through life's dilemmas by consulting a core of holiness and righteousness that shows us the way through tough decisions, like how to stop an aged parent from driving, keeping her safe without robbing her of dignity, how to support our child through a time of disappointment that we know will not be meaningful in 20 years, but right now is crushing to them, or how to support a friend through depression. There's no verse in the Torah that tells us what to do. We've got our life experiences, we pull it together, and then we struggle. We struggle to figure out the right way to do that, consulting our community, our friends. So I sort of feel like we live with this dilemma. We, like Abraham, sort of pioneers with a sketchy roadmap. I just want to go back to one thing, Ashley, that you talked about with Yitro, and this goes back to the prior portion. Go, if you can, to Exodus 18:13. Bouncing a little bit around here on the lesson plan, but it's kind of thematically there. So,
Yep.
Nancy, do you have 18:13 in front of you?
Yeah, give me 1 second. Yep.
Okay, go ahead. Read us the English there.
Next day, Moses sat as a magistrate among the people, while the people stood about Moses from morning until evening.
Okay, so this is the thing that Yitro confronts. He sees Moshe, and this is what causes him to give advice to his son-in-law, saying, "You're doing this all wrong." So Rashi comments on this and on the issue of the difficulty of justice, and we're going to go back to the issue of justice within this, but sort of an interesting Rashi that basically says that anyone who is engaged in the dispensation of justice is a partner to God in creation. That is the level of what's the right word, endeavor that the human being is involved in figuring out the dispensation of justice. Now, aside from it being a good teaching, I'm wondering if you look at the Hebrew of this, and maybe you could even divine it from the English, what's the code here that points Rashi back to creation to talk about being a partner in creation?
Are we in 18 or 21?
We are in 18:13, the verse you just read.
Yeah.
Any hints in the Hebrew to creation? Yes, Annette.
I don't read the Hebrew, but is it from morning till evening? Does it have something to do with the cycle of, or am
Well,
I all wrong?
no, you're pointing to the morning and evening, and after every single day of creation, it says Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Boker, Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni. So Rashi sees the Erev and Boker there and says, oh, I see it. This is the link to creation. And so I think it's talking about the complexity of judging. Let's now flip to what Mishpatim says about judging. Chapter 23, verse 3. Joanne, could you read us 23:3 and 23:6?
Nor a poor man shall you favor in his dispute.
So you read 3, go to 6.
You shall not skew the case of your indigent in his dispute. Okay.
So what do we have? 23:3. So tell me about 23:3 and 23:6. How do those two verses land for you? Anybody? How do they work together? Merle.
The
No,
social status shouldn't be involved in your decision. You should neither favor it nor dispute, or put it down.
Right. So where does that leave you? What are you supposed to do?
You're supposed to look for what's correct.
Right. Supposed to follow the facts.
Right.
This is very interesting.
Impartiality, partial justice.
Impartiality. And what's the narrative today that, there's a narrative today that's very present in the news that I think poses this precise judge's dilemma, or the dilemma.
It's the oligarchs that are trying to rule the world, and in our country we've got the same thing happening.
Yeah, can we get a little more specific?
I was just saying that it's neither the rich nor the poor.
Yeah.
You bribe your way into justice, or the opposite of whatever, not get justice because you can't.
Yeah. Well, these verses focus on the poor, but Joanne, you're right to say they apply also to the rich.
Yes.
Right.
And to me, the people who are most confronting this issue right now are Merrick Garland, Fonnie Willis, and Alvin Bragg, as they figure out, are they going to charge the rich guy? And all that goes along with, at the end of the day, the perception of justice. And how, I guess, Merle, you were saying, follow the facts, right? Which ultimately is what you have to rest on. But, take a look at the January 6th Commission's report, which is, I guess, they seem to be facts that you could not controvert, right? And yet, even with all of that, there's probably going to be debate over it. But that's what they've had to cloak themselves with because of this. Let me go to Susanna and then Merle. Go ahead.
There's also the issue of cash bail that's coming up. I just saw somebody on Twitter yesterday going, I don't think there's a single billionaire in prison in the United States. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is. But all these people who have committed huge financial crimes, and somehow because they can afford to, and also their presumed respectability that they're not going to go away, they get to stay at home. They get to have a little ankle bracelet watching them. But
Right.
other people who can't, or who are poor, or who are disfavored, or for whatever, discriminated against, they're stuck behind bars.
Right. Certainly a rule that skews in favor of the rich. Yes, Merle.
I just wanted to go back.
Oh, Joanne, go ahead.
I'm
Joanne.
sorry, you had said before about what code, and I was thinking of the Code of Hammurabi, but I don't know the date of this, because that's really also all about that you can't use money to benefit various justice interactions. So I thought that was the code to which you were referring, but I could be off base here.
Well, I wasn't necessarily referring to the Code of Hammurabi, but I appreciate you pointing to it. And I think it definitely is a predecessor document historically.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
thought, the timeline there. Yes, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay,
And
go ahead.
I
Ron.
was thinking of, I don't know that much about the New Testament, but I do know it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven.
Hmm.
This sort of, the rich shouldn't be treated more harshly because they're rich, nor neither should they be favored. And the New Testament seems not to have picked up that, the duality of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming I'm definitely no New Testament scholar. I've been assuming that that's kind of a reference to the kind of corruption of being rich, and that the rich maybe are a little bit farther away, kind of in their gated communities from,
But some rich people can be moral.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Look at Ashley.
We're all rich.
There we go.
Correct.
Rich in Torah.
By world standards, we are all rich.
That is
Yes.
true.
And I think I'm richer than the oligarchs because I'm happy with what I have.
It's interesting. I've also heard about the degree of creature comforts that we enjoy, given the time in which we live, and that in comparison to even relatively well-off people at the end of the 19th century, we've got luxuries they could only dream of. So it really is all relative. Are any other thoughts before we? Yes,
Well,
Suzanne.
I mean, no, but I don't think we can ignore the fact that this verse can also be taken by those who oppose things like reparation or affirmative action or whatever. I mean, it can be used that way to say, well, it says in the Bible, you shouldn't favor the poor, you shouldn't favor and what you people are doing and proposing. And so there is, as the Supreme Court looks at these issues, they could take this in that way as well. And we have to face that aspect too, or figure out what that means.
It's a perfect illustration.
Out of context, especially.
Yeah.
If it's taken out of context.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect illustration that even when you drill down from the level of the 10 Commandments to here, you're still dealing with degrees of abstraction that, you can kind of argue all over the place. And I've been following the affirmative action decisions and, pretty carefully, and all the issues about the 14th Amendment and should it be colorblind, or as, Ketanji Brown Jackson argues forcefully, and others have before her, it was specifically there to protect the rights of Black Americans. It is not colorblind, and to try to turn it into something colorblind. And then, they go back, well, for how long should that be? As early as 1870 or some crazy, there's a Supreme Court case from 1870 where I think the majority says, and for how long are we going to need to coddle these people? Back in 1870. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Anyway, I want to take us to another verse in here, which is kind of a complicated verse, but has a interesting commentary on it. So it's 23:2. And Nancy, do you want to read this one?
23:2?
Yeah.
Sure. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute so as to pervert it in favor of the mighty.
Okay. So, Joanne, do
Yeah.
you have Alter?
I do have Alter, yes. I think it's a little different in translation here.
That's why I'm turning you to Alter. What does he say?
You shall not put your hand with the guilty to be a harmful witness. You shall not follow the many for evil, and you shall not bear witness in a dispute to go askew, to skew it in support of the many.
Okay. And he has a footnote. What is his footnote?
His footnote is, you shall not follow the many for evil. The last word here could also be rendered harm. The most straightforward way to construe this verse is as an injunction to cling to one's own sense of what is right, despite the temptation to follow popular opinion, including when popular opinion is bent on the perversion of justice.
Well, that's completely different it doesn't even mention mighty at all. It interprets many as mighty.
Precisely, yes.
Yeah.
The
So-
majority, like majority rule, in that sense, the many is the mighty, if majority is always the rule.
But it doesn't even say poor man
Yeah.
at all.
So I'm saying this really basically to wind Ashley up because
Yeah, well, you did it.
I know that translations drive you crazy. So now I'm going to take you to another place. So
It
first of all,
really means the translators didn't know that I know what it means.
yeah, the Hebrew is very ambiguous and difficult to translate, which is why you're getting all of these different interpretations. So here's a very interesting one. A commentator, Or HaChaim, Moroccan commentator, he takes this in a completely different direction, but makes a point that's related to what we're talking about. He says that the intent of this verse, which is about chasing the majority, can only be understood in the context of a completely different law, which was a law of unanimity. So in capital cases, where there's the death penalty might be administered, that was required to be heard by a panel of 23 judges. And if the judges of a majority ruled for the death penalty, then the death penalty was administered, except that if there was unanimity for guilt, the accused went free. All right. So,
That's
They
good.
don't like mob rule.
so let's, right.
I
was
didn't
gonna
hear
ask.
I didn't hear the last line.
If there's unanimity, the accused goes free. If there's unanimity to convict, if everybody says convict, the accused go free. So let's start with what's the logic of that rule. So Susanna, you came in and said they don't like mob rule, right? The Talmud says that, look, a case can be made for anything. And if you're literally at the point where these judges who are like superb lawyers, that's why they got put on the bench, none of them can argue and sway in favor of the accused, then you've got groupthink and you've got mob rule, and that's per se something to throw out. Here's what the Or HaChaim says that this verse is saying. Consider yourself the 23rd judge, and 22 of your colleagues have voted to convict. It is now your decision to decide whether to vote to convict or acquit. He says you are faced with an impossible dilemma, because if you believe the accused is guilty and you vote guilty, the accused gets off because of the unanimity rule. If you believe the accused is innocent and you vote innocent, then the accused is going to be killed.
Convicted, right.
Right. So how do you rule? And the Or HaChaim says that the purpose of this verse is to say that even in the face of that conundrum, you rule the facts. So
Let the process take its course. You have to do what you believe is right individually.
because anything else it erodes confidence in the system. And in fact, it's a really sophisticated comment, even though it's kind of contrived, it comes together to say, at the end of the day, you have to be anchored in the facts. Because if it's anything else, then you get, potentially accused of manipulating rules.
I would hate to be that person. I
Yeah,
would do anything. Not to
But we
be that
also,
person.
we also have the concept of you shall not take a life, no matter what, that could override it. And this was a lot of gyrations and machinations to make sure, as far as we know, there's no record of an execution in
right.
these centuries at all.
What does this
So
mean?
presumably the death penalty was actually never used. It was held as a lever, like this crime is so severe that it warrants that, but we
Right.
will never actually enact it. Which
Right.
I like that interpretation.
Yes, I do.
You can translate this for me, so I'll know what it really means. Since the translators don't agree, who knows Hebrew and can tell me what it means?
Well, I'm going to take a shot at it, but I'm going to tell you where I run into problems. So lo tihiyeh, you shall not be, acharei rabim, after the many. Rav is large, the many. So that could be translated majority, could be translated the powerful, but it really should be translated the many.
Many, okay.
Right? After the many, liraot, for evil. So you should not be after the many for evil. And frankly, I still think that that's a little bit ambiguous as to what that means. Velo ta'aneh al riv, and I think ta'aneh is to corrupt. So you should not corrupt al riv. So riv is a dispute, but Rav,
Right.
it's a pun on Rav, which is the many. And so lintot, I don't know what that is. Lintot achare rabim lehatot. And do you see the similarity between lintot and lehatot?
Yeah, I see the similarity. I have no idea what it means.
Same
So
word root, and I don't know what those words mean either, and that's my
oh,
problem.
okay. So does anybody here know the Hebrew? Where do they get poor man? Is there any word in there that means poor man?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
But poor
But
man, hold on, poor man does not appear until the third verse.
Yeah, right.
And vidal means poor, so the lowly. But there's no poor, like verse 2 in the English does not reference the poor. It says pervert in favor of the mighty. And that's acharei rabim, to pervert in favor of the majority would be the better way to say it.
Right. But the mighty could be the minority. If it means majority, that doesn't mean mighty. Majority means many or
You're right,
most.
right. So license
that-
to be taken. Go ahead.
The word Rav, also though, it has a connotation, and it's in the Torah also because like the way Pharaoh said, there were too many Israelites. There was
Yeah.
a Rav. So it has a connotation of, I like the word mob, like too many, like the bad many or
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it has a
also,
negative connotation.
it also doesn't allow you to say, well, I did this, but like with the confidential files that were found, he did it too. You can't do that. You can't say, I did this, but there are many, many who did the same thing. I'm just doing the same thing as the other guy.
Right. So
That excuse is, I'm not the only one.
yeah,
It's not an
exactly.
excuse.
Yeah. Well,
What was the word that you had a question about?
yeah, it was lahatot and lintot. So
And-
verse 2, below ta'aneh al riv, you won't kind of pervert in favor of the majority. Lintot acharei rabim lehatot. I'm not sure what those words mean.
Chabad has it translated as
That's it.
pervert.
By being swayed is how I have it translated.
Lintot.
And
Okay.
I have it as to pervert.
And I think the pervert is lo ta'aneh, but do they also say lintot is the pervert?
Yes. One is swayed and the other pervert. Yes.
Anyway, so as one of those verses that has enough ambiguity in it that spawns this hydra of translations. Okay, I want to move us towards the end here, to the end of the parsha, and it's chapter 24, and I think we're going to read verses 1 through 12, but we're going to 1 through 11, and then focus on Na'aseh v'nishma, which is there in the middle of it. So Annette, do you want to read us 1 through 11, chapter 24, if you have it?
Then he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and bow low from afar. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but the others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him." Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of the Lord and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice, saying, "All the things that the Lord has commanded, we will do." Moses then wrote down all the commands of the Lord. Early in the morning, he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars from the 12 tribes of Israel. He designated some young men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls as offerings of well-being to the Lord. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people. And they said, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do faithfully." Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord now makes with you concerning all these commands." Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there were the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky, for purity. Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank.
Okay, thank you. So before we dig into some of the details of it, there's a lot of ceremony here, right? That you can feel. And there's a covenant being entered into. And there's a covenantal ceremony with blood. And if you take a look at verse 6, it says Moses took one part of the blood, but actually the Hebrew, Vayikach Moshe, Moses took Chatzi Hadam, one half, not a portion. So we have a covenantal ceremony with blood and dividing things in half. Does this resonate with any section of the Bible
Yeah.
that you know of? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Maureen.
from Genesis.
Yeah, which
They
one?
cut an animal in half. and
Right.
Went in the middle of it.
I love throwing these out there because Merle
Yeah.
invariably gets them. Thank you. So it is the Brit Ben Habitarim, the covenant of the pieces, the first covenant that God enters into with Abraham. So this really kind of mirrors that in a very subtle way. So I want to also go to one other thing of translation here. That's the JPS translation in 7. So in 3, the people say all the things that the Lord has commanded we will do. So all the things Asher Diber Adonai Na'aseh, we will do. But in 7, at the end, it says Na'aseh v'nishma, right? We will do and we will hear. The English does not quite translate it that. It says all the things that the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do. It is we will do and we will hear. And that's the part that I want to ask people, what do you think about that phrase that we will do and we will hear? What does it mean? Is it a model to follow? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it the way it is? What do you think?
It reminds me that we're not commanded to have faith, we're commanded to do. And through our doings, maybe we'll get faith.
Commanded to do, and then maybe the faith follows.
Yeah.
Okay. What else do people think about this Na'aseh v'nishma? We will do, we will hear.
Maybe this will upset our translator person problem, but that Alter translates it as heed, not hear, which implies that the more we do, the more we understand about why we're doing it.
Okay, so there's we do and then we understand. Okay, which takes us a little bit back to our opening question, right? Of doing and then having layers of meaning as we continue to do. So Joanne, thank you for pointing us to that. Yes, Ashley.
What just strikes me is the dissonance between the eagerness when it first appears, oh yeah, we'll do that, with the not shortly thereafter failure to really follow all these rules. And I'm reminded of that, as an organizer of everything I do, when you first present it, something people are all, yeah, but then the hard part is keeping that enthusiasm on day 8 of the strike, or the second month of the outreach plan, or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. The long haul plan. That's great related to our lives and your work. Yes, Annette.
I'm thinking about the difference between listening and hearing.
And what is the difference?
Well, you can listen to someone but not really hear them. So I'm trying to make a parallel between saying you'll do something and actually hearing what it is you're supposed to do, which to me is internalizing it and really understanding it.
So you think hearing communicates a deeper engagement and understanding than listening?
And I come from the opposite way. I
Yeah.
hear that, noises in the background, but I'm not listening to them. I can't avoid them. They're just, I hear my compressor coming off and on.
You listen to
I'm not
me.
listening to it.
You listen to me is kind of obeisance. I mean, it's interesting. You can take the words either way.
Yeah.
I hear the
But-
point counterpoint.
But I can keep, apropos of your first question when we started, I can keep doing something by rote, but then I can really hear the deeper level of what I'm doing is about.
Right.
Yeah, it's like when you say the motzi, it comes by rote, but when you think of it,
Yeah.
you're thanking God for.
Yeah,
the-
so when I really
belief,
hear what it is that the motzi is about.
Well, it's a little bit like they have ears, but they do not hear.
Right.
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 Right. So yes, you can take it either way. So let me read you does anybody have anything else they want to say? Because I'm going to read you a few of the rabbis, both ancient and contemporary, with regard to what these things mean, how they take Na'aseh v'nishma. Sforno, I think maybe 13th century, 14th century. This is a reference to action designed to ensure that they could obey God's directives without the thought of any reward that might be in store for them. So this is blind obedience. We will do, and actually it's sort of like the verb you talked about, right, at the beginning, like they're all in. And we'll figure out what it means later, but the fact that you told us to do it, we'll do it. Rashbam, also an earlier commentator, we will carry out what God has said already, and we are also prepared to listen to what God will command from here on in. So we'll do what you said, and we'll keep listening. Rav Kook, who was chief rabbi of Israel, 20th century, they made two promises: to do and to listen. The order is crucial. They promised to keep the Torah even before knowing why. The Midrash relates that in merit of this pledge, the angels rewarded each Israelite with 2 crowns. And a heavenly voice explained, "Who revealed my children this secret used by the angels?" What was so special about this vow? We will do and we will listen. On the contrary, would not fulfilling mitzvot with understanding enlightenment be a superior level of Torah observance? Why does the Midrash and why does the Midrash refer to this form of unquestioning allegiance as the secret used by the angels? While wisdom is usually acquired through study and contemplation, there exists in nature an intuitive knowledge that requires no formal education. The bee, for example, naturally knows the optimal geometric shape for building honeycomb cells. No bee has ever needed to register for engineering courses at MIT. Intuitive knowledge also exists in the spiritual realm. Angels are sublime spiritual entities who do not require extensive Torah study in order to know how to serve God. Their holiness is ingrained in their very nature. It is only human beings, prone to being confused by pseudoscientific indoctrination, who need to struggle in order to return to their pristine spiritual selves. For those who stood at Har Sinai, it was not only Torah and mitzvot that were revealed, they also discovered their true inner essence. They attained a sublime level of natural purity and intuitively proclaimed, "We will do. We will follow our natural essence, unhindered by any spurious artificial conventions." That's sort of a mystical. Rabbi Sachs, a more modern rationalist Orthodox interpreter. Na'aseh v'nishma means we will do and we will understand. From this, they derive the conclusion that we can only understand Judaism by doing it, by performing the commands and living a Jewish life. In the beginning is the deed. Only then comes the grasp, the insight, the comprehension. The modern Western mind tends to put things in the opposite order. We seek to understand what we are committing ourselves to before making the commitment. That's fine when what is at stake is signing a contract, buying a new mobile phone, or purchasing a subscription. but not when making a deep existential commitment. The only way to understand leadership is to lead. The only way to understand marriage is to get married. The only way to understand whether a certain career path is right for you is to actually try it for an extended period. Those who hover on the edge of a commitment, reluctant to make a decision until all the facts are in, will eventually find that life has passed them by. The only way to understand a way of life is to take the risk of living it. So, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and eventually, through extended practice and long exposure, we will understand. Yes, Merle.
In my other life, I was president of the Neighbors Hillel Foundation in Montreal. And we had the executive director is one of the big influences in my life. We had a big study going on. It was back in the 60s, and the kids were revolting and whatever. And the kids were yelling, why are you always insisting on us doing it? We just want to do it. And my executive director said, you don't understand. To do it is to do it, and to do it is to do it.
That's it.
That's this thing. It's in a nutshell.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll mention, there's a strand of Hasidic commentators. So the Kotzker Rebbe, why am I spacing out on the one of them? And then the third one is the Sfat Emet. And so this, I'll just focus on the Sfat Emet, who looks at this phrase, and but they all say the same thing. The path to holiness is a never-ending cycle. We have an innate sense of the good, and yet, what is the program for attaining the good? Na'aseh v'nishma. You try to do what is right and just. Then you learn from your experience, study Torah, and try to up your game. You can see these are my words, not his. It's a constant process of ascent, of climbing the rungs of a ladder. That cycle of doing and learning and going back and doing again, that is what elevates us to the next level. Then we reach the point of constant search and continual renewal and elevation. Na'aseh v'nishma v'na'aseh. Go back to doing. Again, this is me, not him. As the shampoo bottle teaches, lather, rinse, repeat. And so I think the message of this, my apologies to the spot, Annette. So as we continue along the path, doing and learning, using that learning to elevate our doing, continuing to evolve and raise the bar, striving to find our better angels. May we be able to continue on that path. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks so much,
Really
Rich.
nice. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm
Thank
ready
you.
to shul.
Thank you
That's
for your
great.
wonderful
Yeah,
learning.
I'm heading to shul too. Don't forget next Shabbat, please.
Next
come
Shabbat,
with
the interim rabbi.
Rabbi, check
Candidate.
out.
Yes. Take
Thank
care.
you, Reg.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right.